Hi, welcome to Slideshow. My name's Dave Hayward. I'm the founder of Europa Creative Partners. Before we get into this episode, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for your support over 2025. This podcast has gone from strength to strength, and we're delighted with how it turned out and the support that we've had so far. On that note, if you are a regular, or even if you aren't a regular viewer, watcher of the show, if you could take the time to like and subscribe and even leave a comment on the podcast app with which you're watching or listening to this show, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us out as a young fledgling show. I'm going to get into it now. Here is Tim Warren just shortly after I asked him to introduce himself.
I'm Tim Warren. I'm an executive across a couple of different areas. So it's been technology, it's been financial services, and I've strung a lot of that together. I've had a number of startups myself. I've worked in startups. So I kind of talk about from startup to enterprise. I've covered a lot of different scale. But more recently, I've been thinking a lot about leadership, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So this slideshow has come together. It's a new one for me. It's the first time I've presented, actually. It's something I've been toying with for a long time. I've been talking about it on panels, etc. And quite a few people started saying, how about putting that into a presentation and giving it? And as a public speaker, I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So resilient leadership. Over time, I've worked through a number of crises in my career, sometimes company, sometimes personal, sometimes external. And I came up with this idea of leading with grit and grace. So you have to keep going, but you can do so in a reasonable manner. There's the concept of a crucible where things are melted together, fused in the concept of melting metals. But I came across something I love, the Japanese art of kintsugi pottery, which is where pottery is broken and then it's rehealed, usually using some kind of precious metal, gold or something beautiful. And the idea is that the art form, the pot becomes something more beautiful. It's not the same as it was. It becomes something more beautiful with the changes, with those broken places. It has improved. So that's the concept I use. So I say, talk about leadership it's not a checklist. It's a whole bunch of experiences so you can make a right choice at the time. It's not just ticking through a series of things that you've been told, oh, you must present this and you must present that. We're often told this, there's this vision of leadership where you're always stepping up and you're always getting better and you're improving. And it's kind of the idea of the leader being better. And I reject that. I actually got into leadership because I found that I might have been a 7 out of 10 at doing some of these things like software development, but I could find and more importantly communicate with the people who were 9s and 10s. So when I took that learning through the rest of my career, I discovered actually it's really about being, it's not about being the best at something. It's about sometimes being the first person to leap into the fire, as it were, but it's saying, hey, join me, let's do this together. And sometimes it's about saying to people, what do you think? Often it's about that, actually. You can't sail through these waters in a completely stress-free way. You're probably not being a leader if you're doing that. You just happen to be there. You might be fortunate. And I'm not advocating for stress, but it might not be building the backbone of true leadership.
So there's sort of an aspect to this, which is that leadership where it's more about attraction than promotion, which is kind of what is a marketing concept, but actually I think it plays out in real life as well.
Yeah, if you think of a music group, a music group can be a leader. They're a leader because they do what they love and they do it well. And I'll look at the Rolling Stones. They've been around for forever and a day, right? So they didn't set out to be better than other people. They just set out to do their own thing. And if you roll back to the 60s and 70s, they were just another band. In the 80s and 90s, they had a bit of legacy. Well, now they are truly the grandfathers of rock and roll, and they are not in competition with anyone. They're just doing well. And now, have they had difficult environment? Yeah, they have. But they haven't had the essence of people they have to be better than. Not this idea of, oh, I can write a better song or play the drums better or sing better. It's not about that for them. It's about doing something well, and their experience enables them to do that.
One of the other, to use another music metaphor, Grandmaster Flash in the Furious Five, I saw an interview with him where they asked him, how did you become the biggest DJ in the world? And he said, I didn't set out to be the biggest DJ in the world. I just wanted to be the best in my street. And then I wanted to be the best in my block and then my neighborhood. And then it just started going from there.
So I'll take you through a couple of the key experiences that I've had, and by no means do I mean to say that I come out of these waving the flag as, hey, I've won. What
Yeah.
I've done is I've learned, right? So I was working in software in a startup, and it was doing quite well. It's the late 90s, and then things started going absolutely mental in America, and everyone wanted to be there, and everyone wanted to be there, and we had the opportunity to list the company and all kinds of exciting things that would have been wild and amazing. But just things just like that, everything turned, right? And what we had to look back on then was the fact that the software was called Wingate. We had to just look at the fact that we were a real company. We were doing things for people who bought the software. And we weren't one of these made up ideas, that web van or whatever, pets.com. We were doing something genuine. We were enabling people to connect to the internet. And even though many companies were blowing up and the news started to look quite bad, we just focused on what are we good at and what can we do for people? What is it that people need? And we were a real company. We had real revenue. So look, I was really young in my career at that stage, but it was this idea of almost getting back to your knitting and looking at where you are and focusing on what you're good at, and not trying to be good at everything, I guess. Now, roll that forward into kind of 2008 to the GFC. It really kind of spanned a couple of years, 2008, 2009. And I was with Goldman Sachs at that time, and it was just like you were being beaten up every day. You look at the screens of Bloomberg or whatever screen you're looking at, and all the news was bad, and it got worse. And we had the kind of news stories like Lehman Brothers blowing up and Bear Stearns blowing up and this kind of thing that wasn't meant to happen ever, not even a lifetime. These were meant to be the gold standard. I mean, Lehman Brothers had been around over 100 years, I think. The thing I did there, I guess, well, a little bit. I put here trust the system, but there's more to it than that. We had some good systems which we'd put in place, and while some of those other companies did, they didn't always follow them. I think getting through on the company side was about putting good risk management things in place, and then when everything's going bad, actually leaning on them and saying, we built these for a reason. We used our reputation to take investment from one of the top investors in the world, Warren Buffett. And that was because he said, I want these guys to continue. And we did. We were able to. He made a very smart investment. The other thing on the personal side of things was just taking one of the things I specifically remember. Sometimes things would be quite bad, and you just have to walk outside and you hear the birds and you'd see the trees and you realize the sky isn't falling. That's that area over there. Okay, it was pretty bad. It was the financial system. And I think most people don't realize how serious it got. But it was a human creation that was going badly, but the rest of the world was carrying on. It was surviving.
It's
So
interesting. I've always, I'm really into astronomy, and I remember after some financial catastrophe, like I can't even remember what it was now. It was something to do, maybe a customer's unhappy or whatever it was, and it seemed overwhelming at the time. And I remember going out, and Mars was quite, sort of high in the sky, bright red. And I remember thinking, I don't think Mars cares.
Doesn't care.
Yeah.
In fact, almost always, one of the reasons humans are survivors, I do believe, is we do tend to catastrophize things and make them worse. And I heard something great the other day in a book. It talked about how a lot of people catastrophize things that are beyond their control. And I'll get onto that in a sec. A lot of the time, it's this loss of sense of autonomy or control. When you feel that, you tend to feel quite worried and you fight like you're going to die. But the problem is you feel like you're going to die. Now, you're probably not. In fact, anyone talking about this isn't. They haven't reached that sense. but it feels like it. So to bring that under control, that's the personal reaction and response to things. Nature is one of the best ways to do it. A couple of times when I'd get home, I had a nice house and I had a big lawn. I would go down and I'd take off my suit, put on some shorts and a t-shirt and just lie on the grass. And I could
Yeah,
see the
nice.
trees and again see the birds. It's very humbling. The other thing that's great is, hugging your kids and if you've got a pet, because the pet doesn't care. They're like,
No.
cuddles are good, food's good. That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of research. One in particular study done by or certainly highlighted by Kelly McGonigal, which was around the idea that they got people to take a break, and they either took a break just nearby, or they were asked to go into a green space. And what they found is that people over-indexed in productivity afterwards for the group that went to the green space. It was like 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. And I think there is something about that connection with nature that makes you connected with something bigger than yourself.
I think it brings a sense of proportionality to things as well and trying to understand what matters. Say you're in your mid-30s and you're working for a supplier of photocopiers or whatever, something like that, and you lose a really big client and it's your fault. You feel really bad, but 10 years from now, that's going to be much more in proportion. I think you can speed that process up by going and saying the tree doesn't care, the clouds and the birds don't care, and the connection to that nature is very useful. I certainly could have done more of that, and I've never felt that I've done too much of that, put it that way.
Yes. Nice. Yeah.
So moving on to an external thing. If markets are a human creation, then during the Christchurch earthquake, that's a very external thing, and everyone feels a huge loss of control because there's nothing you can do about it. Nature's going to win always in that sense. There's the dark side of nature too. Now, I was by this stage, I was at there were two major events, but one of them in particular, I was on the phone to this guy, Mike, and he starts swearing and it goes noisy and quiet and he stops talking. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And then he told me what had happened. But the thing I learned through that, we had these plans of what to do, but they didn't encompass the people aspect. And the value of having people that you can trust is immense because the business continuity plan said this is how we continue business, but that wasn't relevant. The valid thing was, are you going to be able to feed your family and do you have a place to live? Are you safe? Luckily, no one I was connected to in that lost anyone, but that did happen and people were injured and the likes. The thing there was trusting the people, supporting the people on the ground based on what they said. So now, if we didn't have established trust there, that would have been harder. I was in Auckland. I was completely remote from it, and I could keep a level head. And I'd be interested to know their feedback, and I must do that. I'll call a couple of people and say, hey, what did you think of my feedback? All I did, I'm not saying I was good or bad, but all I found that I could really productively do was just listen to them and get them what they needed. They didn't want to leave Christchurch and go to Wellington and be set up with desks. They needed to work out which supermarket was open. And a lot of that ties into a bit of what happened through COVID.
What's interesting about what you're talking about is sort of two opposing ideas that you've got to keep in your head. One, in the Goldman example, was that you had risk profiles, you had process, and under pressure, you got to make sure you stick to those processes because that's the thing. But on the other side, also sometimes the situation doesn't match the plan. And especially what you're talking about around people, because their life and their work are suddenly compressed into one thing and life's coming at them hard. So you've got to be there for them.
Absolutely. It's, it brings me on to this point, which is I had the rather extraordinary thing happen, which is where on one day, in fact, within a single hour, essentially my marriage ended and I realized I was losing my jobs. It was a huge personal event for me, and that's certainly the worst I've ever felt. There was no way that you could plan for this stuff. So yeah, you do move beyond the plan and the pre-decisioning into a place where logic's gone and you need to just focus on the people. And the really interesting thing was, even though I had the highest earnings that year of any year up to, and even up to this date, it was simply the worst year of my life. There was absolutely no correlation. These were two, call them outlier events if you want. But when I did have a very large amount of money, it was very hard to enjoy that. And this is where so it's about understanding people, and the person was myself. I had been able to extract or abstract my feelings from the situation in most of my working career. By this stage, I was 40, and I wasn't able to do it because these were personal crises. I was doing some simple things in terms of just, just if you have a bad day, getting through the day and still breathing, that's all you could do. That's fine.
That's a
Taking
win.
that judgment away, and also the sense of expectation. The main expectation is from myself, letting go of that. And then you've got other people's expectations, is being able to wriggle free of those. That's really hard. And when you start down that path, you realize the way I respond to things is all based on this history. And you start to understand, the basis of, how did your family, when in your childhood, how did you deal with difficult situations? What were you taught by your parents? And in your early career, what did you learn? What were the examples that you had? And this is now, this is a major chapter in my book, as it were. It's definitely no footnote. But what I've been able to do, instead of having it as the title of the book, now it's one of many chapters. If you think of the pottery analogy, for me, I had been building a good pot, very high quality, using lots of logic and reason, and that was the building of me. And then I got to this point, and that was the breaking point, and the pot shatters. And I spent quite some time in 2015, I guess, trying to put the pot back together so no one could tell that the pot had been broken. And I remember talking to someone who was she was a coach, a career coach, but also an incredibly empathetic person. And she said, maybe you're a different person now. And that's one of the most powerful phrases that I had, which was, I'm not rebuilding the past. I'm leaning into this concept of building something that's grown on that, and as I've got another one here. I don't need to dwell on it, but there's been a few things I've experienced before. This was after, that 2015, that crucible year for me. And I had something that was going to change my life, an investment return that was going to return a vast amount of money to all of the investors, and me in particular. And due to a tiny clerical error, essentially one contract that wasn't fully signed, the buyer got out of it and the company went to zero, and I lost all of the money out of that. And so this is where this would have been a life-changing event. Actually, what happened, and I was able to rationalize it very easily at the time, it was 2016, I think. It was a non-life-changing event. It was no event at all. Now, what some people do is they pre-spend that money in their mind, and they feel the loss of the, few $100,000 or something this was going to be. But what it taught me about governance is that there's a lot more than, again, the checkbox exercise. It's a lot more than that. The team involved were so confident in it happening. They were already out giving presentations on their grand success. And
God.
it was months down the track that this thing evaporated like that. I'd offered my help, for free. It's like, when you do this as an investor, it's like, is there anything you need from me? Can I go? I've closed a few deals. I've never had a deal blow up. Can I help? No, we've got this. And we didn't. I remember being in the background on a phone call about closing one of the deals. And I just longed to be there. My involvement would have cost nothing. I offered my involvement. They wouldn't take it. I couldn't force my involvement on them. And as a result, well, I'm not saying I would have, perfectly saved the deal. And had I been involved, I wasn't. Now, I wasn't after credit. Credit's the last thing you should ever work for. Remember the Rolling Stones or your DJ example. People don't really do things for credit. They don't do things well for credit. That's the equivalent of getting a really high mark in the exam, but then being a failure at the content. So this was more a reinforcing lesson for me. And the more you start thinking about these, the more you realize, oh, I've got these lessons, but it's not always about when it goes terrifically badly and it has a big impact on me. Sometimes it's that I've been able to navigate through here, and I wasn't completely destroyed. So I've just blanked the name of my startup there. It's
Yeah.
probably pretty obvious. I just don't want to dig into that. It's not
Yeah.
really about that. But in my startup, I had some red flags around personnel and personality. And one of them was that my co-founder tried to get me to provide security over my house for a lease. And I just treated this as an isolated incident, but it wasn't.
Right.
And it was a reflection on the fact that there were people in the organization that were prepared to put undue pressure on people to get outcomes that might have suited them at the time, but it wasn't reasonable, wasn't fair. And I felt pretty bad about this. I wasn't able to sail through that. I remember feeling, particularly bad. The interesting thing was it wasn't, and I was told, yeah, oh, you're stuffing this up, blah, blah, blah. We're going to lose this lease because of you. Well, we didn't,
Yeah.
because the issue really was the person who was negotiating this lease wasn't very good at it. Now, a good negotiation is to say, no, we're not providing security and you're going to lease it to us anyway. That's what we did. That's what we got. So it is actually their failing, but I took it on personally. That's me in the picture there. But I took it on and felt really bad about it. Now, I should have used that as a learning experience. It was very early on. In fact, there was even something that I haven't gone into here. There was even something before we founded the company. But I wish I'd known that term red flags a bit better by that
Yeah,
stage.
that's
But
right.
it was really, I guess, an abusive position, and with the person knowing that I was fairly susceptible to it. But, coming on to how we managed with COVID during that. What we worked out with COVID is it was so fluid and changeable. It was something that we couldn't really have prepared for. But I do think that our company got through quite well. We worked with our customers, and what we said was really this starts with the team. It's all about people. Everything's really all about people. We said to the team, it's you first, you personally, it's your family. And then once you've dealt with that, then your customers. Don't worry about the ambit itself. Don't worry about the company, but deal with the customers and their needs. And their needs may not be business needs. And sometimes I remember talking to someone who was unable to buy toilet paper. It was as basic human need as that. That if you can solve that, you will develop a fabulous business connection. Right. So, but what cracks started to show in the governance, and I remember a couple of examples I've listed here. One, I used the word, I wanted to get through the board meeting. I used the word nominal. We have nominal receivables, and this person hit the roof. What do you mean? You're trying to fund you're trying to hide the real numbers. It was a few dollars.
Yeah.
They didn't trust me, and they had no reason not to trust me. I did everything with a very high level of transparency. In fact, all of the financials were there and available to them. They just hadn't read them.
Yeah.
And if they had read them, what they needed to do was not say, right, well, let's wait to see the next ones, and not let's try and catch Tim out, but let's trust Tim. But what was happening is they were scared and they acted in a variety of ways that caught me out. And I was unable to, I guess, deal with their personal demands. I was hoping, I guess, expecting naively that they would be professional. And I discovered, you've got to it was like I had a bunch of babies, honestly. There was
Yeah.
someone there who wanted to show off about some deal he'd done in the 90s, and there's someone else who
God.
wanted to talk about what a difficult time he was having on his day job. It's like, oh, they were not there for me. One story, one director called me on a Saturday to ensure I was getting work-life balance.
Oh, that's great. That's so good. I
Yeah.
think what's interesting about what you're talking about, it seems like a theme. I could be wrong, but you've got this. When people act out of ego, and trying to control things, they act badly.
Yes.
And there's a weird paradox in that when you let go of control, you get more control.
You do, and it's different control. People think you need to control people, but that's simply wrong. What
Yeah.
you want is to deliver a bunch of outcomes. And when you can abstract people control from those outcomes, you get different outcomes, and those are superior.
Yeah.
And in the case where someone was trying to force me to sign a guarantee on a lease, wrong outcome, exercised through controlled people.
Yeah.
When there was a level of listening to what I could bring to the process, we got a better outcome. Now, maybe the landlord would say we didn't get a better outcome because they had less security, but we paid on time. We were there the whole time. We always treated the place well. So they got a good tenant. I want someone, I don't want to sign a customer who doesn't understand the documentation. That's like tricking someone into marrying you. What I
100%.
want is someone who's really understood that documentation. I'll get interviewed, a while back when I used to interview for jobs. I'll get interviewed for a company and they'll give me the contract and they'll be like, people treat you badly when you negotiate the contract. I'll be like, if you're hiring me to be the CEO of your company,
Yep.
what you want is someone who can negotiate it and get the right outcome. I want to sign the customer who comes in with full knowledge, full understanding, and then you get what I call a bottom drawer contract that no one has to look at.
I had a similar experience actually. I went for a job and they said, "Oh, this is the salary that we want, but you've said that you want this salary." And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Of course, my one was higher." And they said, "Oh, well, we could find someone else to do the salary." And I said, "Well, maybe you should do that then, because this is what I need." And the other thing is, I'm not actually now in a position to allow you to give me a lower salary because you're expecting me to work for you and negotiate for you. And if I start from a position of weakness,
Yeah.
then we've got off on the wrong foot, and they laughed and,
You're right. It's actually it's an argument, it's an indirect argument for transparency, actually, and it's a really good
Yeah.
one. And if anyone watching this is thinking about having a job conversation, you want to make your salary expectations known really early, like really
Yeah.
upfront, because it's a negotiating PowerPoint. Because later on in the thing, say your expectations, from 150, and someone comes back and says, "Oh, really? This job's paying 120," and you just say, "Look, you interviewed me knowing my salary expectation, so I know that you can pay it.
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
either," and then if they push it, you say, "Well, I'm sure you didn't mean to mislead me." "Oh, no, no, no," they'll say. "Well, you're either going to pay me, with full transparency, knowing what I want, or you're going to be advertising a different job, which I wouldn't be interested in. But you haven't used my time, so I know that you're going to pay that salary." And that works. I've never lost a job. Yeah, I've never lost a job because I insisted on a particular salary level. You have to be reasonable, but people shouldn't be paid too much or too little. So I'll just finish off on that because I think it's an important point there is that when people become scared, professionalism comes only once, like you said, you can when professionalism gets stripped away and when people become scared because they haven't dealt with something and they are not able to sufficiently adapt. And what people do then is they feel their ego comes under attack. And I had this. My ex-wife, when I could see through the games that she was playing, she would attack me personally, call me names and make up stories about me and that kind of thing. And it's the same, I've seen it with boards. I've seen it in professional situations with an executive, a range of different executives. I've even been called in as an advisor and you can see where the problems lie. And the problems lie with the people.
Yeah.
When people get scared, they go into this self-protection mode, and it's not protection of their physical life; it's protection of their their ego. I almost said evil there, but isn't
Yeah.
that funny?
Nice.
Loss of ego is dramatic, and people will fight to the death for it. When you go through a significant enough crisis and you let go of ego, people don't tend to act in that way that's just so negative. So this brings me onto the looking back. When I get through that kind of thing, when you find something where you feel attacked and you feel your hackles raising and you get that adrenaline response and that kind of thing, your vision narrows and all that. It's simply about breathing. And, there's all kinds of woo-woo things you can say, oh, go do yoga or learn this breathing exercise. It's just about the most simple thing about living is breathing. It's something you've got almost full control over unless you stop breathing, and then your body
Yeah.
will take over. But if you could put everything out, and there's I've forgotten the Japanese word for it. I think in Masugi, it's the concept of no mind, which is not thinking, and just calmly get through the basics. That's fine. If all you can do is get through the end of the day and you're still breathing, win, right? Doesn't matter what other people say. And it's why people, when they're in that stress situation, they don't actually need to be told what to do. They just need to be allowed to be. And that's that, the nothing else matters. And I'll give you the example in my marriage. I was 40. I had just run a marathon. I was CEO of an investment bank. I had the beautiful wife and the lovely kids and the white picket fence. I mean, I'd maxed everything, man. And then within this incredibly short space of time, it looked like I was going to lose everything. And I I couldn't lose everything. The thing implicitly I needed to save my mental state in life. The only thing I decided to hang on to was time with my kids. That's the thing I decided. I don't have the energy to fight for anything else. Money, I'm not going to bother. Unreasonable demands, whatever. I'll just give in. My job, you know what? I don't really care. Time with my kids is the only thing that I would fight for. And I decided, I visualized it. I thought to myself, if I end up in a one-bedroom, shitty old flat in the back of somewhere in Auckland I never thought that I'd live, I don't care if my kids are with me. I
That's
don't care.
beautiful.
I'll just hang out with them and we can eat cheap food and watch TV. That's fine. That's fine with me. That's all I want. Now, once I was able to step away from all that other stuff, I ended up, interestingly, retaining a lot of those things. You know, I kept the car and, like I said, I had an amazingly good financial year. Felt like
Right.
rubbish, but I earned a huge amount of money. Um, and all the things I was able to step away from, the house, I ended up keeping the house and she
Yeah.
moved out and I kept that. And isn't it really interesting? Once I no longer cared about it. And so it's not about the status things. And it was just time with the kids. I just had the one measure. And if anything ever got in the way of that, that was the thing I would fight. And if it didn't or it supported it, that was the thing that was okay. Single focus, let go of all material things.
Interestingly, in sales, when you're trying to close a deal, or something, and you really need that deal, if you focus on that aspect of it, things can frequently fall apart at that point. And I've seen that phenomenon happen time and time again. Sometimes with me personally, And I think it's something to do with the fact that you stop listening. You stop listening to what the client is actually saying, and you're too focused on your own outcomes and not focused on the collective
Yeah,
outcomes.
you go into survival mode. And when you go into survival mode, a number of things happen. It's like safe mode on a computer.
Yeah,
Stuff doesn't happen very well. The basics to keep you alive do, but signing a deal actually doesn't keep you alive. It goes beyond that. But you've got to let go of a bunch of things, and it will happen if it's going to happen. And I'll just zap onto this. You kind of learn that you need to live in this world beyond logic. Logic's really quite basic. It's often not very useful. And when you can understand that people are emotional creatures having an emotional experience, then you can realize that, wow, people aren't machines. They have very particular needs. And your needs as a salesperson, it is not about closing the deal. It's much more about the fact that if you go back and see your sales manager and you haven't closed the deal, loss of ego, loss of status, those things feel like you're going to die. And this is where the word existential comes in. Now it's bandied around far too much at the moment. People talk about an existential crisis. The original word, the meaning of the word existential is, can you continue to exist? Will you die?
right.
Almost always the answer is no, right?
Mm,
So very few people actually have existential crises. They think they do. Oh my God, I'm not going to sign this deal. I'm having this existential crisis. I'll go to the pub after. No, you're not. You're having an emotional crisis. You think you're operating in a logic space, but you're not. You are operating in an emotional, irrational space. You're protecting your ego. And when you can understand that you and the customer or the prospect or whoever it is and your sales manager are operating in an emotional space, you realize that 1 + 1 isn't 2. It's A plus elephant equals time to eat. Shit doesn't line up. It's not an exact jigsaw. It's not noughts and crosses. It's more like it's not even a Mondrian. It's more like an impressionist painting at
yeah,
best.
nice. I think there's a really great quote, which the scientist name escapes me at the moment, which is that humans are not thinking machines that feel, they're feeling machines that think.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like Daniel Pink. Did it
Yes,
come from
yes.
Thinking Fast and Slow?
No, it's an Italian guy,
Oh, right.
and I'll find it after this, and I'll put it
Yeah,
in the comments.
that's a great one. And I've heard it, outside of this sphere in a different space. You're not a human being having a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a human experience.
I love
That's
that.
kind of in a different
Yeah,
paradigm, but
yeah,
it's to do with that. And this is where the concept of repair comes from, which is you are those, you can't make the cracks disappear. You can't wind back time, but you can heal from them in a way that brings more beauty. Those cracks there are lines on your face. They are grey hairs. That's very real. It might seem like a logical thing to say, let's eliminate them, but you can't, because time moves in one direction for us, the way we experience it. Resilience is a direction that you go and you build on. You don't get resilient by learning, going back and doing the same thing over and over till you get it. It's like there's that thought process. Hey, if you could go back to the beginning of school and do it again, would you? When people are young, they tend to say yes. When people are older, they're like, oh, hell no, I don't want to go back
yeah,
to school.
yeah.
Because it's not like you do it perfectly. You just make
No,
different mistakes.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah, yeah. The novelty actually comes in the newness of the mistakes rather than the learning, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it brings me on. I developed a little bit of a framework, and I haven't really weighted these appropriately. And as I continue to speak about this, I'm continuing to learn. I'll say, I can improve it. There's a couple of things happen. In a crisis, there's a communication void typically. Now, because, people talk about you're overthinking it. Well, what happens when people overthink is that most of the stuff that goes on in that gap is not great. So you need to fill it as a leader. You also need to prepare for some of these things. You need to be able to pre-decide, pre-plan. That's like business continuity, but equally throw it out the window if it's not working for you. Giving control to people that you trust is a really critical one. And trust is implicit in what I'm talking about here. And then, what are you actually learning from in that case? So I call it the gift in the wound, the gold in the cracks of the pottery. So in the crisis, you've got this void of communication. When leaders stay quiet, and it's a relative thing, not an absolute. So when things are going well, we'll pick a number, you communicate once a day, and that's good. When things are not going well, you need to communicate until people tell you you're communicating too much, and that's probably about right. The people who tell you you're communicating too much, they are the problem. The people who never tell you that you are communicating enough, they are the problem. When I say problem, they're the people you need to consider in the way you respond. Increase the frequency, and it might be that you move from having a 2-weekly meeting to, I had a daily meeting.
yeah,
Way back in 2010. I had a big project I was running. It was going off the rails. So I bought no one was having daily stand-ups at that day. And I just came up with the idea of let's do a daily, because I do not want things to slip a day. It really, every day was going to cost us a lot of money, like $10,000,
yeah,
$100,000. So I said, I don't want to slip a day. Every item that came up, we're going to address that. Say it was a project meeting. We had 30 people. The 2 people that spoke, that was where I spent that day, was with them. So increasing the frequency, you may move from a 2-weekly to a weekly to a daily. I would find a way to communicate almost on an hourly basis. And it could be tiny things. Hey people, great news. The person's come to fix the lock on the door. Now you might not have communicated that when things were good, but when it's COVID, that's the kind of good news. And people say, oh, isn't it good? The door lock's been fixed.
yeah.
Little subtle things. And there's the litmus test. It's you got to communicate until people tell you you're doing it too much, and that's about right. But don't let it stop you or sit there. Just keep going. Okay, so pre-decisioning is really important. Now, this is really important for managing your ego as well. People like to think they don't have one, but they do. That's what lets us cope. One of the things, now I found the hardest thing for me to talk about was the loss of my marriage, or if you're fired for being a CEO or something like that. So one of the things you do is, this is just a simple example, come up with a phrase. And I think the phrase that I came up with, I've chosen to forget it. I think the phrase was that, I won't say her name, but my wife has decided to leave. It was that one phrase, because if I was asked, how are you and such and such doing? Oh God, I don't want to have to go and explain it. So I had one line and I just gave that line. And I learned that that through executive coaching, but it works for way beyond. It works for personal, it works for business things. Say someone asks you a difficult question. Now, I've got a way of dealing with that. When I'm presenting, if someone asks me a difficult question, I'd say, there's a long answer to that. Let's talk about it afterwards. And it's not that necessarily that I've got the answer, but that will give me time to go and work out what the answer is, or at
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
tell them how to find the answer.
Yeah.
Right. So if you are making decisions in a highly stressful time, there's plenty of science around this. You do not make good decisions. You still have to make some, but there is a line, I think it was Eisenhower, who said, "Plans are useless, but planning is everything." Nothing goes exactly to plan, but the thought, you're not building a plan, you're building a planning process in your brain so you can zip through that really quickly. I could talk just about that. In fact, you can, if you audition for a role in something creative, if you are going for a job interview, the more practice that you do, the more what you're doing is you're pre-decisioning and you're learning the situations and responding to them. And that is experience. And your brain is pretty good with dealing with when you're faking it, which is just role playing, compared to actually lived experience. And the one thing something I say to leaders, I say, do you talk to yourself? People say, oh no. I say, oh, you should.
Yeah.
When you're alone, I talk to myself all the time. What do I
100%.
do? I talk through all of the difficult situations that I'm going to face.
Yeah, and I found something interesting with, now with chatbots coming into meetings and recording transcripts of meetings and stuff like that. There's so much insight to be gleaned from that, from rewatching them or just simply getting the transcript and asking a LLM what the themes are, because you find this kind of richness of information from your colleagues or clients or whatever it is when you're in the moment you potentially missed or just didn't see it at the time,
Yes.
because you're occupied with other stuff. I think it's a real opportunity for people to kind of get closer to the people that matter most to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really valid point. It's your content, it's others' content, and making sure. One of the things to do as a leader is in a normal situation is just making sure you meet with people at the level they need to discuss. So you've got some quiet people. They're not going to give you their best ideas in a room full of people. Meet them on their level, which might be one-on-one. This final thing here I want to touch on, because that really kind of sums up this principle, is you've got this human need for a sense of control. And one of the things that comes from that is that you need to control a fair amount of what feels like your life to make it feel like your life. Now, if you don't have that, you tend to find people develop addictive behaviors, and this is, getting into the psychology side of things here, which I'm not qualified on, but I've heard enough about, is addictive behaviors are often an outlet of control. It's like, that thing isn't going well in the rest of my life, but at least I can do this. Maybe I can scroll on my phone until 2 a.m. At least I'm controlling that, and it gives me a sense of control. So you need to, as a leader, you don't need to take it, you need to give it. Give people things where they can exercise control. And as long as some of them contribute to the business outcomes, then you're going in the right direction. Like I've said there, give people choices to make. The classic one is when you're dealing with employees, when you're dealing with, your especially teenagers, when you're parenting. If you say, what do you want for dinner? They might say, I want croque en bouche and lobster thermidor. They're not going to get it, okay?
Yeah.
But if you say, do you want fish and chips or pizza, both of which you're happy with, they will make a decision which you're happy with. They have a sense of control. You've got a sense of control, and you can actually execute on that. All the parties in that situation, it's a very simple situation, but when you extend it more to other things, it works. And here's something, the counterintuitive thing is sometimes to give people choices. Now, leadership is predominantly about having to make the choices that no one else wants to make. But sometimes it's a good leadership practice to let other people do that, because then they discover how difficult things can be. So you say, look, people come and they'll say, oh, I don't know if we need to do this or that, the other thing, or what. And you say, what would you do? And some people simply step away. And they're the classic workers. They'll say, oh, that's not my job, that's your job. Other people left with it will be like, oh, geez, I really don't know. Let me think about it. Some people might have an answer, and it's worth listening to that. Going back to the crisis thing, giving people choice. For instance, I didn't set up our Friday drinks Zoom meetings during COVID. Someone else did. And they said, oh, Tim, should we do this? I said, sounds good. Why don't you try it?
Yeah.
Then they said, oh, should we run a poll? I said, sounds good. And then I said, but you don't have to ask me. Just try it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then this came a thing. Now, one of the things it did, because I gave them freedom, it released me. People didn't expect me to run the meeting, and it could mean, because I didn't really enjoy them, to tell you the truth, other people did. It meant I didn't have to go. Now, I'm going to zap through this because I've only got a couple of minutes. So find the gift in the wound. That is finding what is the gift you have been given is one of the most powerful statements I've ever learned. Given that you've gone through what you have, you can't change time. How can you build on this? So with everything that happens, and I sometimes journal on this every day. What have I learned today? What can I do better? What's the gift I've been given is a question that I ask when I've had a harder day. If thankfully I haven't had a car accident for a long time, but say I have an argument with someone in the supermarket checkout, what have I learned from that? And this is the concept of the kintsugi leader, which I'm trying to discuss here, which is that is a beautiful bowl or pot there, and it's probably more beautiful than the original. Is it logically perfect? No. The original component of it has a logical explanation, and you can actually write a mathematical formula for that original pot, but not for the resulting outcome. Now, which one do you want? I want that one because it's really beautiful, and that's a very defined thing. The whole thing, it's better than the sum of the parts. And that really is resilient leadership, which is you can be more than just your experience. You can bring things to the table that you haven't even experienced with a combination of pre-decisioning, and some people are just fortunate that they are like.
Tim, thank you for coming on Slideshow, and I hope you'll come back because it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for being so vulnerable and open. I think a lot of people would talk normally about leadership. They talk about all their successes, so it's really great to see the scars laid bare, even though I'm sorry that they happened to you, obviously. So yeah, thanks for coming and have a great day.
Okay, thanks very much.
That's a wrap. It's not only a wrap of this episode of Slideshow, it's also a wrap of 2025. So I'd like to take this opportunity, like I did at the top, just to thank you for all your support and encourage you, of course, to like and subscribe to the show. Big thank you to Tim Warren, what a great guest. And a big thank you to Europa Creative Partners, particularly Ferris, who edited and produced this show. That's it. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you in 2026.